Brothers and sisters in spirit, there are moments in life when the weight becomes unbearable, when the darkness presses in so closely that even hope seems like a fading echo. It is in those sacred hours of need that we fall to our knees, not as beggars, but as children returning home, crying out not just for help, but for a miracle. A miracle is not a magic trick. It is the breath of God moving through the impossible. But before we ask, we must first surrender not only our pain, but our pride. To ask for a miracle is to kneel and say, "Lord, not my will, but yours be done." Yes, we long for healing, for provision, for deliverance. But before the answer comes, the heart must be purified by faith. Faith that doesn't depend on sight. Faith that stands even when the ground beneath us shakes. This kind of faith pierces the heavens. It opens the gates through which mercy flows. Remember, your suffering is not in vain. Every tear, every sleepless night, every silent scream, if you offer it in union with the cross, becomes a sacred offering. And heaven listens more closely to the soul that is broken yet still trusts. So when you pray for a miracle, do not shout in panic. Whisper in love, speak from the depths of your soul, not to force God's hand, but to invite His presence. Pray not because you are desperate, but because you know He is near. And when the miracle comes, whether it is the change you prayed for or the peace to carry the burden, receive it with gratitude. For in every true miracle you will find not only God's hand but His heart. Amen. Total surrender to God's will is not merely a concept or a religious obligation. It is the highest form of spiritual maturity and trust. In the time of need, when our hearts are heavy with fear, confusion, and desperation, the greatest act of faith is not to demand answers, but to let go of our own plans and open ourselves fully to the divine plan, no matter how unclear or painful it may seem in the moment. To surrender to God is not weakness. It is the deepest strength one can possess, the strength to let go of control, to stop wrestling with life, and to fall into the arms of the one who holds all things together. It requires humility, because the human heart naturally resists what it cannot understand. We want to know why we suffer. We want to know when the pain will end. We want to know the outcome before we take the first step. But surrender says, even if I don't understand, even if the road is dark, even if the answer is silence, I will still trust. In moments of crisis, we instinctively reach for solutions. We make plans, ask others for advice, and often beg God to fix the situation our way. But the soul that is truly surrendered does not demand its own will. It places the situation in God's hands and simply says, "You know what I need better than I do. If it is your will, let it be done." That kind of prayer, though it may be whispered through tears, carries more power than the loudest plea. For in that moment, the soul is not just asking for help. It is offering itself as a vessel for divine grace. Total surrender does not mean passivity. It does not mean sitting in silence and doing nothing. It means being faithful to the present moment, doing what is in your power with peace, and leaving the results to God. It means continuing to pray, continuing to believe, continuing to hope, even when your emotions tell you to give up. It means walking by faith and not by sight, even when the path is covered in fog. It means saying yes to God over and over again, even when you do not feel His presence. There is an incredible beauty in surrender because it transforms suffering. The pain may not disappear, but the weight of it changes. When you surrender your will to God's, your heart learns to rest even in the middle of the storm. You are no longer carrying the burden alone. And more than that, you are no longer afraid of the outcome, because you trust that whatever happens, God will bring good from it. This is not blind optimism. It is the quiet confidence of a soul that knows who the Father is. Those who surrender completely to God are not spared from suffering, but they are spared from despair. They know that even if their prayer for a miracle is not answered in the way they hoped, it is still answered in the way it was needed. They are open to miracles not only in circumstances but in the transformation of the heart. Often, the greatest miracle is not the change in situation, but the change in the person. When you surrender, your heart becomes soft, your perspective becomes eternal, and your soul becomes light. You realize that the miracle may not be that the storm goes away, but that you learn to walk on the water. Surrender is not a one-time event. It is a daily, sometimes moment-by-moment choice. Every time fear rises, every time impatience stings, every time you want to grab control again, that is a moment to surrender. It is not easy. It can feel like dying to self, because in a way it is. But from that death comes new life. From surrender comes freedom. And in the most mysterious way, the more you surrender, the more you see the hand of God working in your life, in ways you could not have imagined, through doors you never expected, and in timings you never would have chosen, but that turns out to be perfect. Total surrender is the language of saints, the posture of miracles, and the foundation of peace. It is where heaven touches earth, not through thunder and lightning, but through the silent, trusting heart that dares to say, even in the valley, "Thy will be done." Faith that pierces heaven is not ordinary belief. It is not the shallow conviction that crumbles when tested, or the convenient trust that disappears in discomfort. It is a faith that endures beyond human reason, a fire that continues to burn when all visible light has faded. It is the kind of faith that does not just speak to God but moves him, the kind of faith that climbs past the noise of this world and touches the very heart of the divine. This is the faith that pierces heaven. Such faith is born not in comfort but in trial. It is in moments of deep need, when every solution has failed and every door has closed, that this kind of faith begins to form. It is when the soul is stripped of all supports and has nothing left to lean on but the invisible, that is when it either breaks or it soars. And those who choose to trust when there is no visible reason to trust become people of unshakable strength. They carry within them a stillness that defies the storm, a confidence that is rooted in something higher than circumstances. This faith is not loud. It does not need to prove itself. It often looks like quiet perseverance, like a heart that continues to pray even when no answer comes. It is not blind either. It sees clearly the reality of pain, the weight of uncertainty, and the depth of suffering, and still chooses to trust that God is working behind what is seen. This faith is forged in fire, not in the absence of pain, but in the presence of grace. Faith that pierces heaven is deeply personal. It comes from a soul that has walked through the shadows and found that even there, God is near. It is the faith of someone who has cried until there are no tears left and then whispered, "I still believe." It is the faith that says, even if the healing doesn't come, even if the door doesn't open, even if the miracle looks different than I expected, I will not stop believing. That kind of faith becomes a fragrance that rises to heaven, a cry that moves the heart of God, not because it is demanding, but because it is anchored in love. This faith does not ask for proof. It doesn't wait for signs to begin trusting. It trusts first. It trusts when the promise seems delayed, when the silence is long, when others say it's foolish. It clings to the character of God more than the circumstances of life. It says, "I know who you are, and because of that, I will not let go." Heaven is not deaf to such faith. The prayers of a faithful heart carry weight. They may seem like whispers in a dark room, but in the unseen world, they are declarations of war against fear, doubt, and despair. Such faith is often misunderstood. To the world, it looks like foolishness, believing in what cannot be seen, hoping against all odds, staying at peace in the midst of chaos. But in the eyes of heaven, it is powerful. It is the faith that causes mountains to move and chains to break. It is the faith that opens prison doors and raises the dead. It is the faith that says yes to God even when everything else screams no. It is the kind of faith that makes room for miracles, because it believes not just in the possibility of God's intervention, but in the certainty of His presence. To have faith that pierces heaven is to love God not for what He can give, but for who He is. It is not transactional. It does not say, "I will trust you if you bless me." It says, "I will trust you because you are worthy." That is why this faith is rare. It is not based on feelings, and it is not shaken by delay. It is constant because it is rooted in something eternal. It becomes a light that never goes out even when everything else does, and this kind of faith is not reserved for saints or mystics. It is offered to every soul who dares to believe. It begins with a choice, not a feeling, the choice to trust, the choice to keep walking, the choice to say Amen, even with trembling lips. It grows every time we turn our eyes from fear and lift them toward the heavens. It grows when we remember past mercies and believe for future ones. It grows when we stop depending on our own strength and place our entire hope in the one who never fails. This faith does not promise a life free from struggle, but it promises a life that can never be defeated, because the soul that trusts fully in God cannot be conquered by circumstances. It becomes a vessel through which heaven touches earth. It becomes a voice that is heard in the throne room. It becomes the cry of a heart that may be broken, but is still full of power because it believes. Suffering as a sacred offering is one of the most profound mysteries of the spiritual life. To the natural mind, suffering appears useless, senseless, and cruel. It is something to be avoided at all costs, something feared and despised. But when the soul is united with God, suffering is no longer seen through the lens of despair. It becomes a gift, a hidden grace, a sacred altar where love is purified, faith is refined, and the soul is drawn into deeper union with the divine. In this light, suffering is not meaningless. It becomes a holy sacrifice that can move the heart of God and bring blessings upon others. To offer suffering as a sacred gift is not to glorify pain or to seek it unnecessarily. It is not about romanticizing hardship or pretending that grief does not hurt. True suffering wounds deeply. It breaks the heart, drains the body, and tests the spirit. But in the eyes of faith, even these wounds can be transformed into channels of grace when they are surrendered to God. A soul that suffers with love, with patience, and with faith does not suffer in vain. Instead, it partakes in the redemptive power of the cross. The pain becomes a prayer, the tears become incense, and the silence becomes a song of trust. When suffering is embraced as a sacred offering, it no longer leads to bitterness or rebellion. Instead, it softens the heart. It brings clarity to what truly matters. It teaches the soul to depend not on worldly comforts, but on divine consolation. There is a hidden beauty in this kind of surrender, the beauty of a soul that chooses to love even when it hurts, that chooses to hope even when everything seems lost, that chooses to believe even when heaven appears silent. This is the soil in which holiness grows. This is where miracles begin to take shape, not always in visible ways, but in the secret transformation of the heart. A sacred offering of suffering can be made not only for oneself, but for others. When a soul willingly offers its pain in prayer for the healing of a loved one, the conversion of a sinner, or the peace of the world, it becomes a powerful intercessor. This kind of prayer does not need words. The groan of the heart, the quiet endurance of sorrow, the whispered yes in the dark, these rise to heaven like the most fragrant of offerings. God, who sees what is hidden, treasures such sacrifices more than grand displays of devotion. He listens to the prayers that are made not only with lips but with wounds. In this offering, suffering becomes redemptive. It is joined to the suffering of Christ, who gave everything for the salvation of the world. When a soul unites its pain with His, it does not suffer alone. The weight becomes shared, the burden becomes lightened. And the suffering, instead of being a prison, becomes a bridge between earth and heaven, a bridge through which divine love flows to others. The soul becomes a co-laborer in the mystery of salvation, not by doing great things, but by silently bearing pain with faith and love. This sacred offering is not always understood by those who do not walk the path of faith. Some may ask, what is the point of pain? Why not resist it, escape it, numb it? But the one who sees through spiritual eyes knows that nothing given to God is ever wasted. The world may not see the purpose of hidden suffering, but heaven sees. The angels stand in awe of the soul that offers itself in silence, in trust, and in love. The saints were not exempt from suffering. In fact, they often experienced more than others, but what made them holy was their response. They turned every trial into a prayer, every hardship into a ladder toward God. To suffer in this way requires grace. It is not something that can be done by sheer will. The human spirit is weak, and in the face of pain it naturally recoils. But when the grace of God fills the heart, it gives the soul strength to endure, peace to remain still, and faith to transform the trial into a gift. This grace does not remove the pain, but it infuses it with meaning. It allows the soul to say, even in agony, "Let this suffering not be wasted. I offer it to you, Lord, for whatever purpose you desire." There is a sacred intimacy that comes from offering suffering to God. It draws the soul close to the heart of Christ, who himself suffered out of love. It makes the soul more compassionate, more understanding, more deeply human and divinely connected. The pain may not disappear, but it becomes something holy. It becomes a flame that purifies, a burden that blesses, a silence that speaks. In the hidden corners of this offering, the soul discovers a love that does not abandon, a peace that surpasses understanding, and a strength that comes not from self, but from heaven. Prayer that comes from the depths is not rehearsed, polished, or recited from memory. It does not rely on eloquence, posture, or timing. It is the raw cry of the soul, a groaning of the heart too deep for words, born in silence and soaked in sincerity. This kind of prayer is not concerned with formality. It breaks through all appearances and dives directly into the heart of God. It is the kind of prayer that is not planned but erupts from the Spirit in times of great need, when human strength has failed, and nothing remains but the desire to be heard by the One who sees all. When life strips everything away, when a person is reduced to the deepest pain or desperation, the soul reaches a place that no one else can enter. That hidden space within, the well of anguish, hope, longing, or brokenness, becomes the place from which this kind of prayer rises. It is not a whisper for convenience nor a request for luxury. It is the voice of someone who has been brought to their knees not by discipline, but by the weight of life, and who can no longer pretend to have control. In that moment, prayer stops being a task and becomes a lifeline. It becomes the only thing that can breathe life back into the soul. This prayer is not always articulate. Sometimes it is a single word. Sometimes it is no word at all, just tears, groans, or silence. But even that silence speaks volumes in the courts of heaven. God does not measure the worth of a prayer by its length or clarity. He measures it by its depth, by the degree of surrender, by how much of the heart is being poured out. A deep prayer carries weight not because of what is said, but because of who is saying it and how it is being offered. The deeper the pain, the more sincere the cry, the more broken the spirit, the more powerful the prayer. These prayers are often born in suffering, but not always. Sometimes they rise from awe, from a moment of overwhelming gratitude, or from a sudden awareness of God's presence. But whether in joy or sorrow, they come from the same place. A soul that is real, exposed, and open before its Creator. There is no performance, no pretending, just truth, and God meets us in that truth. He meets us not where we appear to be, but where we actually are. That is why prayer from the depths has such power. It removes every mask and invites God into the most honest part of who we are. It is in the depths that we confront the true state of our hearts. There, we cannot hide behind religious phrases or outward signs of holiness. In the depths, we face our fears, our doubts, our sins, our wounds, and our helplessness. And in offering all of that to God, we experience what prayer was always meant to be: communion, not transaction; encounter, not obligation. This kind of prayer may not change our situation immediately, but it always changes us. It softens us. It roots us in humility. It strengthens us from the inside out. And it draws God close, not because He was far, but because we finally became still enough to notice Him. People often think deep prayer must come from great spiritual discipline, but the truth is it often comes when there is no strength left for anything else. When you are too weak to pretend, too tired to explain, and too broken to be anything but honest, that is when your soul speaks most clearly. That is when God leans in the closest. He is near to the broken-hearted and listens with special tenderness to those who have nothing left to offer but themselves. This kind of prayer does not demand a miracle, but it leaves space for one. It does not manipulate or negotiate. It simply places everything pain, desire, confusion, fear into God's hands and says, "Do what only you can do." That is all. And yet, that simple offering carries more spiritual power than 1,000 empty words. Because when the heart is fully engaged, when it is stripped of distraction and given completely to God, it becomes a vessel ready to receive whatever heaven chooses to pour out. Prayer from the depths does not guarantee instant answers, but it guarantees connection. It reminds the soul that it is not alone. It reawakens the truth that even in the valley, even in the pit, even in the shadow of death, God is listening. He is not indifferent to our cries. He is not absent in our agony. He is attentive and He is near. And though we may not feel the answer right away, though the heavens may seem quiet, something shifts. Something unseen begins to move. The act of praying from that place alone is a miracle, the miracle of a heart choosing to speak when everything says to stay silent, of a soul choosing to hope when everything says to give up. Person choosing to reach for God even when they feel they have nothing left to give.